Because being Black and living with MS is definitely not the norm, sometimes it feels like you are really alone in an already kind of exclusive group of people. Being a minority within a minority really pushes me to really create more spaces specifically for women of color living with this disease, to let the world know that we are here, we have this disease, and we are navigating it just like the rest. So for me, it's really just empowering to create those spaces.
Perfect.
Being Black and living with MS is a little extra. There's an unspoken toughness that is part of it. And that's kind of what MS is. It's tough to remain resilient. And that is something that I've grown in me because I understand its importance. So I continue to cultivate that trait of keeping my chin up and looking toward tomorrow and the new day.
What gets me through each day is, honestly, there's no one word or method to it because of that resilience. I'm born this way. I'm born strong, I'm born a leader, I'm born a pioneer, and I have that strength in me that knows how to persevere even when I think I can't. So it's an innate thing. And I know that's not a direct answer, but because I'm Black, I'm strong.
I definitely understand the whole resilience factor when it comes to African Americans and how we just manage to get through everything, but you know, we're still human. And I think accepting the latter, that we are human, is empowering. And so once I stopped being so hard on myself and let myself be human, I was able to recommit myself a love for myself that I had not had in a very long time just because of life. And then I also just enjoyed everything more than what I had. For instance, one of my greatest joys is being a mom, and you know, I've never taken that for granted. I consider that to be an ultimate blessing, and I just really and truly make sure that little girl knows that her mama loves her every day, and that, you know, no matter what she faces, that she continues to dance through everything.
What I hope to get out of today's discussion with the panelists is open and honest dialogue about what it's truly like to be Black with MS. We know what it's like on our day-to-day to deal with this, but I think there's limited conversations where a collective group of Black people talk about their experience as a whole. African Americans do get MS, and it's time that more conversations are had. That way more research is done, and that way we can understand our own journeys.
Perfect.
Hello, my name is Victoria Reese, and I'm pleased to present MS Focus's new series, Roundtable. Today we're talking all things African American and MS. I've been living with MS since 2012, and I have relapsing remitting MS. I'll let our panelists introduce themselves.
Hi, my name is Shambrika Wise, and I have relapsing remitting MS. I was diagnosed in October 2015.
Hey, I am Damian Washington. I have relapsing remitting multiple sclerosis, and I was diagnosed in 2016. Was that 3-4 years ago? Something like that. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Lauren Work, and I also have relapsing remitting multiple sclerosis, and I was diagnosed in June of 2016.
How long did you experience symptoms pre-diagnosis?
It was actually September 2012 for me. I run a lot, and I noticed one day I had this tingling sensation going up and down my spine. And I think I saw like 2 different specialists, and the pains I was describing and the discomfort I was describing was MS, but that was the first onset, if you will. So it was like not quite yet able to be diagnosed. So they were like, oh, you just probably pulled something. Let's throw you in physical therapy for about 6 to 8 weeks. You should be fine. And it was actually right before my wedding, so I felt like it was just an additional stressor on top of like that planning process too. So, you know, it did eventually go away, and I was like, oh, that's probably what it was. But totally resurfaced under a different time, but definitely stress was my trigger.
And how long was that window?
2012 was the first onset. The diagnosis was almost a year to the day, October 8th, 2015, because it was 2 weeks right after my divorce and almost 9 months to the day of when I lost my grandmother. So it was like just a really high stress period for me. So understanding the correlation of the two is easy to see how that resurfaced.
I'm like, you had a lot going on right there. That's woo.
Yeah, it was.
My goodness. I experienced symptoms for, I would say, years. The last 6 or so months of me like, yo, something's really wrong with me. It was a sort of, let's go to this doctor, let's go to that doctor. So it was about 6 or so months of going to 3 various doctors before I got a diagnosis.
Yeah. So I actually had kind of like the quintessential diagnosis process and just the symptoms that I was experiencing because I had optic neuritis. So one day I was like studying in my dorm and I noticed that I couldn't really see out of my left eye. And I kind of was like, oh, maybe it's like, you know, when your eye, it's blurry when you wake up in the morning. I was like, oh, it'll just kind of go away. And I actually had that for like a week and a half, 2 weeks. And then finally I was like, I need to go to the doctor. And so I went to the on-campus health specialist, and she didn't know what was going on, really had no idea what it was, and she sent me to the eye doctor. And one thing about that is I went to the eye doctor like literally 10 minutes before the office closed, and he was like, you need to go to the emergency room. And so I ended up going to the emergency room, was admitted, was in the hospital for almost 4 days, and they were running tests, MRI, had a spinal tap, and then the neurologist that I met with, he was not an MS specialist, but was like, come back, you know, in a couple months or 6-7 months, because we don't know. We see lesions on your brain and spine, but we can't diagnose you yet. And it wasn't until almost 3.5 years later, my senior year of college, that I was finally diagnosed. Yeah.
It took me about 6 months to be diagnosed, from symptoms and I probably was experiencing symptoms my whole life, probably, just because I've had weird issues growing up, but no one knew what it was. But I had the tingling in my leg, and that was on and off and stuff like that, and my doctors didn't know what it was. And then I was at a stressful job. They thought it was stress, so then I was prescribed antidepressants. And then I had a really crazy migraine, ended up with a numb face, and then they did an MRI on my brain, and then it was a mess. So it was like about 6 months. But I think if I had have had like an optic neuritis or something else, then I think it wouldn't have been as easily identifiable. But for my doctors, it was like numbness in your legs and now lesions on your brain, MS.
Everybody has an MS diagnosis story. And you see, you ask the question, and everyone has a 3-minute at least response, 3 to 6 minutes, in the trials and the tribulations, and I tried this, and I couldn't see. And it's a messy ball that sometimes takes 6 weeks, sometimes it takes 6 months, sometimes it takes a few years. And that's something that is part of this whole having this disease thing, and something that should be appreciated and recognized. And when people speak on it, that's why I'm here for it. I'm like, tell me your story. Mm-hmm. Okay, tell me your story, and so on, because I know I have my own. So it's just, whenever you hear other people's stories and you're like, oh, it wasn't just me.
Right. Yeah. And I think that kind of is why it's important for us, specifically people of color, to have platforms to tell our stories on. And really in that I think a lot of people will find a lot of similarities, and ultimately I think it may lead to earlier diagnoses because people are hearing stories and understanding that their experiences are not just random. Exactly. That this could also mean something, and it's important to really take the time to become really centered in your experiences and what's happening in your body to be able to take those next steps, to go to the eye doctor, to go to your physician. But I think people don't even know how or when to take that first step because those stories aren't available.
I think too, like we hand off a lot because we're young. Like it's probably a stress, I'm not sleeping right, I'm not eating right, being in high stress jobs, being in a very rigorous educational program, like all these things contribute to just being, life. But, there also has to come this point where it's like, well, let me do a self-assessment and let me step back and see what's really outside my norm here because something is not right and I need to understand why it's happening.
Mm-hmm. Now, did you guys know anything about MS before your diagnosis?
No.
Honestly, no.
I mean, I've heard of neurological diseases, whether that be like lupus, and kind of those like diseases in that family. And I was aware that at that time, because I was diagnosed in 2016, so a lot of the studies that were coming out about its impacts on people of color were becoming a little bit more prevalent in the media. And so I think I was aware of like this collective of neurological disorders that impacted people of color, but MS specifically, not really. Yeah.
So you're saying you didn't know anybody that
No,
had MS?
no, I didn't.
Did you?
No.
Did you?
I did not. I knew that there were people that had something wrong with them, but it wasn't until my diagnosis happened and they were like, oh, well, that's what I have. And I'm like, whoa, like, didn't know this. You never really talked about it. What the heck is it? You look fine.
The only people I knew was Richard Pryor and Montel.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah, Montel, yeah.
I knew Tamia. I was like,
Oh.
isn't that what Tamia had?
Okay.
And then a friend of mine, a childhood friend of mine, her mom had MS. I didn't associate MS with multiple sclerosis, so I'm like, I know her mom was in a wheelchair, she had something called M something, I didn't know. But no, I didn't know anything. And then so when you get diagnosed, you Google, and then you're like, oh, so that's MS. That is MS. Oh, okay. Throughout Black society, we often shy away from discussing illness. If we're sick, a lot of times we refrain from telling others. Why do you think that's so? Or did you face this hurdle post-diagnosis?
So I think, and forgive me if this is a blanket statement that, may not be applicable to the two of you especially, but I think Black women are just taught to deal with it because we have to deal with so much and we don't have the opportunity to be human and to feel. And it's like we are often put in a situation where we have to figure it out, especially if we don't have that support system in place to let us feel like there is something wrong with me. This is not just me having a bad day. This is not just me over-exaggerating. Like, there is something wrong and I need help figuring it out because I don't have all the answers.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it, again, I think it aligns with the strong Black woman trope or even just the strong Black person idea that you kind of need to suppress things and just kind of move on. But I also think it's the lack of images that are reflecting people like who are working full-time, single mother with a new child, or someone who's in law school like myself, or someone who's building a brand and working across all these different platforms. I think the image of MS is definitely white, immobile, and probably a little bit older too. I mean, I'm 25 and I was diagnosed when I was 21, 22 years old, with my first symptoms being when I was 18 years old. And when I was doing my Google searches and really looking to see what MS was, I didn't see anything that looked like me. And it wasn't actually until I came across Victoria's campaign, We Are Illmatic, maybe like 2 years after, a year after I was diagnosed, that I started to really see what those images looked like and really seeing people that looked like me having the experiences that I was having. And so again, I think it really just goes back to community and the importance of creating spaces in which people can really find solitude, which is why Victoria and I have started the nonprofit We Are Ill, really focused on women of color, specifically women of color who don't necessarily fit the mold of what MS looks like, and really working to redefine what MS looks like and what chronic illness looks like, and in general what sick looks like in our communities. So
the Black family in general is going through a lot. It has been going through a lot. And you know, the Black family missing Black fathers, you know, and then you have single Black mothers, and these single Black mothers deal with illnesses, not just MS, but deal with illnesses all the time and are taught to deal with it because that's just historically what we are kind of trained to do. It's in our blood now to kind of keep going. So it's not a good quality, but it's a developed and, you know, learned quality. And I think that it's great that we're in a safe space to have this conversation, because what we're talking about today is basically having MS, which people have, lots of people have, but MS while Black, because we're dealing with another thing that kind of is a setback in life, you know? So if I wear braids to work, that might be a problem for my employer, but I also it might be a problem if I tell them that I have MS too. So that's another thing I have to deal with, you know, and I think that is why these conversations are important, because we need to shed light on the multi-layered issue of being Black with MS. So I thank you for those responses. Years ago, there was an assumption that African Americans didn't get MS. Today, there's a 47% increase in African Americans that are being diagnosed. What are your thoughts on this?
I think it really just I feel like it's probably not this thing where MS or any disease was just like dropped in Black communities and then all of a sudden everybody got it. I think it's the fact that our communities have access to the type of healthcare that's necessary to diagnose MS. And so, again, I think it's kind of tangentially related to the clinical trial aspect as well. The fact that people of color are not a part of these trials, or not a part of the conversation, really understanding what the illness looks like in different people. So, I mean, I think it really does go hand in hand. And I think it's really just opening people's eyes to the fact that Black people are a part of the conversation as well. It's not just a white woman disease. It is a human disease that impacts a variety of people, but now we know of its impacts in Black communities and the rising impacts in Black communities, and we need to have conversations about them. And we also need to take the time to include people of color in clinical trials and truly understanding how the disease impacts us.
So what you said made me think of, you know, I think that when I talk to African Americans that do have MS, I think they want solutions, answers, they want to be a part of research. I don't think they necessarily raise their hand to be a part. I don't think they know that they need to. You know, like when you're just not a common person, but when you're doing research on anything medical related, you Google and you expect there to be research, articles, all these things. You're not really thinking about what it takes to get those answers. And you don't think that you could maybe be a part of that. So I think that is something like knowing that you can be a part of some of these answers, being a part of some of this research, you know, like you have to kind of contribute to that. Not saying that they're asking or anything, but knowing, you know, I think sometimes any of us, it could be about your car, you know, if you don't write a review, they won't know that the car's airbags aren't good. You gotta let people know, you know what I mean, that something's happening. So I think that that's just interesting that it's like a two-part issue where there's, you know, maybe a lack of participation, but also a lack of representation.
I actually did a clinical trial when I was first diagnosed, so that was the lab rat of me that came out. And the way I saw it, I said, you know, this is already approved by the FDA, but they're still looking for biological markers that they don't have. And I was like, chances are there are still not a lot of Black people that are going to be participating. So I think what you said is spot on. But also, I was in Texas at the time that, you know, I was going through my initial diagnosis. I actually flew to DC to go to Georgetown University and actually found a clinical trial there that I was equipped to actually fit, if you will. And access to that meant me going up there every so often for follow-ups, doing lab work down in Texas, of course, because anybody can draw blood, essentially. But there were still those on-site visits that I had to do, and I'm actually not done. And this was 2015 when I started it. So even though I'm not on the medicine that I initially came under with that trial, they're still looking for certain markers within me. So I think it's definitely, again, spot on what the two of you were saying as far as access to it and knowing to do it, and also kind of having that encouragement there. And I can get, especially in the older generation, why they're not going to sign up to do something of that nature. But I think it's up to our generation, and even like us educating our parents and talking to our parents and our aunts and cousins apparently that may be a little bit older than us too. Like things have changed, and it's important that your voice is heard.
Just basically addressing that there may be some skepticism or some hesitation in participating in clinical trials or research, anything medical related, due to the history of what has happened to our people in clinical trials or experiments. And any Google search will let you know what has happened. It's not just African Americans that have been affected by similar experiments, but things of that have historically affected our relationship with healthcare system or with just experiments and clinical trials. So there's a hesitation there. So that may contribute to why these things are not happening. And not to make a joke of it, but it's just, I think why I'm laughing a little bit about it is because no one talks about it. No one says, hello, African American people. We understand why you guys may not want to volunteer, but let me tell you how in 2020, this is what's happening. This is what happens after you do it. This is where your information goes. It's protected. Nobody gonna mess up your credit. You know what I mean? Like, I think no one's really addressing what is going on or what happened and how the trust needs to be restored. And I think that that's something that I'm glad, again, today we're able to just say that, because I don't think I've been a part of any conversations where people have just said it. But at the same time, to kind of encourage people to say, look, this is a trust thing that has to be massaged. We gotta rebuild this thing, or at least talk about it once or twice, maybe 3 times. And then maybe we'll understand, we'll see more people raising their hands.
I'm hoping that the case, we have more Black doctors too coming to the scene. I hope that will be an encouragement to our community to be more trusting, because it makes sense. Like you connect with who looks like you. You connect with people that feel like, or that you feel like you have a similar story or background to share things with. So I hope, we will see an uptake in more people that look like us to take participation and take opportunities like that. Absolutely.
How proactive are you in talking to your physician? Were there trust issues in the beginning?
I don't know if it was trust issues, but I do think that sometimes it's an issue of getting a doctor to see what page you're on and meet you there. And I think sometimes, at least when you're meeting with folks who are specialists in the field and they're very into it, a lot of things that they're talking about is so high, so above, what I'm even thinking about. I really just want the basics. What can I do right now? What goals can I set for myself right now? How can I make sure on a day-to-day that I am nurturing myself, my body? And then when I come to you, of course, getting the tests that I need. But I actually found one neurologist who did that for me when I lived in the Bay Area at Stanford. And she really just sat me down and had a conversation about how I should eat, working out twice a week. And because I'm so young, I may not feel the disease on a day-to-day or even year-to-year basis, but it's important to know that it's still in your body, and that when you turn 35, it may be very different. And you need to nurture yourself now to make sure when you hit that point that it's not something that you don't want. And so I think those are the type of neurologists and the type of specialists and physicians that are super, super important in a disease like this, because sometimes it can be there and sometimes it can't. So it's important to really meet your patient where they're at to make sure that that progression is not detrimental to them in the long run.
I think for me personally, I didn't have any trust issues per se. I think that I wasn't a veteran patient, if that makes sense. Like, I was just going to the doctor for the common cold or the regular physical, but not until I was diagnosed with MS did I become I feel like a pro at being a patient, where I realized that these doctors work for me and that I needed to be proactive in asking questions, and I needed to be on top of my own health. Like, I would go to the doctor and wait for them to ask me all the questions, and I'm like, okay, all right, what's next, Really, I should go with questions. I should be tracking things. I should go in there with 20 questions and ask them everything I can and let them do their job and tell me what I need to know, And so I turned into a proactive question asker, you know what I mean? Like, I wasn't like that before, but I think this illness is something that, kind of like you said, you kind of want to prepare for as much as possible, and just try to live your best life and like ask the right questions so that they can provide you with the right answer. So, have you experienced any problems having access to care?
I think we've talked before, and I think all of us sit in a lot of privilege, and kind of access to care is not really an issue for the folks sitting at this table. But I know it's definitely an issue within our community. And as we talked about earlier, access is super important because it's all about the onset and catching the disease early, so that you can stop its progression and stop kind of the worst of the worst of multiple sclerosis. So I definitely think those type of conversations should be had, and light definitely shed on communities. And I think we live in a country that does not have universal health care. So access for a lot of people with chronic illness is very difficult. And I think as someone who now is living with a chronic illness, you definitely feel very humbled and blessed to know that you are able to access that. But to not be able to access medications, MRI, spinal tabs, or even just a checkup, every 6 months.
So I know we talked about this before, but I actually just remembered something. There was a short stint in my life where I did not have access to care.
Okay.
And I forgot about it because I blocked it out because it was just bad. But basically, I was working for myself. I didn't have insurance, and even though they have like co-pay assistance programs and things like that, you think that would apply to people that don't have health care, but really, you still have to get a doctor's note, and then to end up getting that, but to go to the doctor, you have to pay out of pocket. But when you don't have a job or the money out of pocket for a neurologist, which is a specialist, could be $800. If you don't have $800, you can't go to the doctor to get that note, to get that copay assistance program. So I literally had to wait until I got $800 to go just to get the doctor to sign something. I didn't even need a real appointment. I just needed him to sign a paper. So just to have an appointment. So I couldn't get any medicine. So this was like 6 months, no medicine, no nothing. It humbled me because although I ended up getting it and figuring everything out, it humbled me in a way to realize that if I was not just employed or financially able to pay out of pocket, but if I was not, if I didn't have access to Wi-Fi, if I didn't have a laptop of my own, if I didn't have a cell phone, I wouldn't have been able to sit on hold for 2 hours to get questions answered. If I didn't know the right questions, I wasn't educated enough, to ask the right questions, to be able to track my conversations and things like that, to follow up, to find out what was missing and what was necessary and all the roadblocks that I faced. If I wasn't savvy enough to ask those questions, I would have given up. And it made me realize there's so many people that have to go to the library to use the computer or don't have a cell phone. So how are they figuring it out when I couldn't figure it out? And I had access to those things. So it's a problem, and I've been privileged most of my time being diagnosed with health insurance, and it's been fairly easy, but it just let me know that it ain't easy out here. And it's a lot of people that look like us that don't have a lot of those things. Studies show that Black women are less likely to be believed by doctors. There are biases when it comes to dealing with pain in the Black patients versus white patients. What are your thoughts on this?
I've experienced it from the perspective of you're not listening to me. I'm not really going to leave until I feel like you truly understand what I'm telling you and what I'm saying to you. I do think that it's tiring.
2 Black women just spoke about doctors not believing them and all this other stuff less than 5 weeks ago on the internet, if that, because this is a prevalent thing.
Things matter. Like,
Yeah.
it definitely put things in perspective on a serious level. It was like, things matter. This matters. My health matters. Like, how I need to go about having people care for me absolutely matters.